Yalimadat, welcome and thank you for taking the time to attend tonight's session. My name is Anar Alibai, and I am a member on National Conciliation and Arbitration Board for Canada and will be the moderator this evening. Our aim today is to create awareness of CAB's services and provide the tools needed for you to act as ambassadors for CAB within the Jamat. This in turn will enable more members to use the CAB services. Before we begin the presentation, I would like to share some information which will provide us the context for this evening. In creating the Conciliation and Arbitration Board in the Constitution in July 1987, Maulana Hazar Imam explained that, and I quote, "When differences of opinion or disputes arise between members, they should be resolved by a process of mediation, conciliation, and arbitration within the Jamat itself, and that this is clearly preferable than to enter into the unhappy and costly process of official and often public litigation," unquote. It is for that reason Hazar Imam created the Conciliation and Arbitration Board, so that the board would act with fairness, speed, confidentiality, and without excessive cost. When conflict is present in families or in a business, there is absence of peace. It impacts the quality of life of these murids, their families, and people around them. All aspects of their lives are affected: their financial state, their emotional state, their mental and physical well-being, and their family and business relationships. With CAB's assistance to arrive at an amicable agreement, the impact of these murids' quality of life is reduced significantly. Family and business relationships are maintained in a dignified way, and an outcome is reached in a timely manner, opposed to going through a lengthy, costly public litigation. We will learn more about this from our speakers this evening. And it is my pleasure now to introduce to you our speakers for this evening. Our first speaker is Alnawaz Nanji. He is the chairman of the National Conciliation and Arbitration Board for Canada. Prior to his role as a chair, he was a member on National CAB since 2015. His past seva goes back to 2005 and has served as a member of the Council for Canada and Grants and Review Board for Canada. Alnawaz is a tax partner at Osler, Hoskin and Harcourt. He practices tax law with a focus on litigation and dispute resolution. Chairman Alnawaz Nanji will share with us a historic perspective, the background of the CAB system, and role of CABS. He will also share CAB's vision, mission, and values. Our second speaker this evening is Zahir Banji. Zahir Banji is the chairman of the Conciliation and Arbitration Board for Ontario. Prior to his role as a regional chair, he served on CAB in the capacity of a mediator for almost 10 years. He has also served on other institutions, including as the chair for the settlement portfolio in Ontario. Zahir is a pharmacist by profession and operates his own business. Chairman Zahir Banji will share with us the process used by CAB from intake to closure. He will also share some high-level statistics of cases handled by CAB, as well as root causes of the cases. There will be time at the end of the presentation for questions. If you have any questions, please raise them in the question box that is available. Thank you. I will now invite Chairman Alnavaz Nanji to speak. Thank you.
Yeah, with that. So the first question, Zahir, if you want to share the slides again, please. The first question people usually have is, why was CAB created? And while CAB was formally created in 1986 in the Ismaili Constitution, resolving disputes and mediation has been part of the ethical foundation of Muslims for over 1400 years. You may know the story of the Black Stone. The Kaaba was being cleaned and the Black Stone was taken down. After cleaning, the Black Stone had to be put back up. There was a dispute between the leaders of the 4 Qurayshi tribes. Who would get the honor of putting the Black Stone in its place? The Prophet was asked to help resolve the dispute, which could have resulted in bloodshed. So how did the Prophet resolve that dispute? Well, the Prophet laid down a piece of cloth and put the stone in the center. Then he had each of the 4 leaders take a corner of the cloth and they lifted the Black Stone and the Prophet put it back in place. This was a creative, non-adversarial solution. As most of you may know, litigation in going to court is adversarial in nature as well as very public. There's a winner and there's a loser. But the ethics of our faith teaches us that in Islam, there are no winners or losers. Rather, the dignity and well-being of each person is important and disputes can be resolved in a non-adversarial manner. Litigation also takes a lot of time and money, not to mention the human cost of dragging out the conflict and delaying the healing process. Many can't afford to go to court, and those that usually can are typically on the verge of poverty afterwards. That is not what the Imam wants for his Jamat. And it's for that reason that Maulana Hazrat Imam formally established the Conciliation and Arbitration Board. The idea of CAB is rooted in our ethics, and it's an institution that ensures integrity and fairness. So where we can resolve disputes within our community, Hazrat Imam wants us to do so. And this helps avoid destructive behaviors which can negatively impact the quality of life of Jamat. On the next slide, we're going to talk about really 2 things. The first is an understanding of that CAB is really an independent and separate institution. We do not report to the council or ITREB or any other body. We report directly to Maulana Hazrat Imam. There's also an international body, the International Conciliation and Arbitration Board, that operates globally and in certain cases acts as an appellate body. The second point on this slide that's important is to understand that CAB actually operates in 19 jurisdictions around the world, which is very unique to our system. You can have a party in Afghanistan and a party in Canada, and the 2 CABs will work together to help the parties come to their own resolution. So not only does CAB in Canada mediate disputes within Canada, but we also mediate disputes depending on the location of the other party. The next slide deals with our vision, mission, and values. And just so you know, this mission, vision, and values were approved by Maulana Hazrat. So CAB's vision is to be the first choice in dispute resolution for the Jamat by providing best-in-class services and promoting dispute prevention. And I emphasize Hazrat Imam wants us to be best in class. Those are his words. But it's not just about resolving disputes, but also figuring out the cause of those disputes and working with the sister institutions to try to prevent disputes. The vision, as you can read on the slide, ties directly into the mission. And our goal is to provide services through having high quality trained mediators and being leading edge. So what does it mean to be leading edge? Now, one example is as a result of the pandemic, mediations could not occur in person. And we know that disputes don't just stop happening because of a pandemic. CAB had to adapt, and all of our mediators were then trained by ICAB in online dispute resolution so that we could do mediations through different online platforms. Finally, and most importantly, are some of the core values to the Conciliation and Arbitration Board. The first one, confidentiality, is critical. We don't share any case information with anyone. The only people that typically know about a case are the parties, our CAB chair, the regional CAB chair, who is the person that does the intake, and then the mediators. No one else knows about the particular nuances of any particular case, including the national members. Our goal is to act with fairness, neutrality, compassion, and sensitivity, and finally, in accordance with the laws of the land and the ethics of our faith. So what is the role of CAB? If you go to the next slide, please. At the international level, ICAB coordinates the global system, develops policies and programs, and provides training to all the CABs across the world. ICAB, as I mentioned earlier, can also act in certain circumstances as an appeal body. At the national level, the National CAB, or NCAB, shares best practices both internationally and regionally, coordinates strategy and training, and provides guidance to the regional CABs, or RCABs. The NCABs also work with sister institutions to develop prevention programming. In some countries where there's only an NCAB and no RCABs, the NCAB would also mediate cases. At the regional level, the RCABs mediate cases. In Canada, we have a two-tier system. We've got RCABs and an NCAB. So the RCABs would mediate the cases and also work with their sister institutions at the local levels for dispute prevention programming. In some countries, they also have kind of 3 or 4 tier systems where they actually have local panels depending on the number of Ismailis in that particular jurisdiction. So if we go to the next slide, this slide provides a visual representation of what CAB does in terms of improving the quality of life of the Jamat. Everyone understands that there's a financial cost and a human cost to disputes and conflict. That impacts directly on the quality of life of every person. So what CAB tries to do is to help parties voluntarily find their own solutions to disputes. Both parties have to voluntarily agree to come to CAB. CAB doesn't tell people how to solve their problem. Each problem is unique, and what may be a solution for one set of persons may be different from another set. The parties must actually determine their own solution. We just help in facilitating that process. Second, the process actually matters. We recognize that starting the healing process is necessary through bandaging the wounds. The reality is that people will continue to see each other, especially in a community context. You may see someone in Jamat Khana, or at a wedding, or a funeral. It is not good for a community to let disputes fester. Many times, people just want to be heard, and the mediation process allows each party to express their positions, but also their interests in order to help the parties find their own solution. We also conduct satisfaction and follow-up surveys so we can improve on our own processes and continue to be best in class, as well as to find out if the parties need referrals to sister institutions who provide a variety range of services. Third, we work on preventing disputes. And how do we do that? Well, we analyze every dispute to determine the underlying root causes. We take that information, consolidate it, and then play it back to our sister institutions so they can develop preventative programming. And Chairman Zahir will talk about that in his presentation.
Yali Madad, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So I'm going to start off with giving you the process, which starts off with intake. Intake usually is in most regions, I should say in all regions, is usually done by the regional CAB chair. It starts off with a referral. Sometimes it's a direct contact that the Jamati member makes to the chair. Sometimes it's through the Mukhi Kamariyas. It could be the institutions like the Social Welfare Board that refers them to CAB. It could be a friends and families that are aware of CAB and lets the Jamati member know that they should be talking to CAB. And quite often it could be past clients who have dealt with CAB and have had a positive experience that they would recommend another Jamati member to call CAB. The initial call could come in either through our council voicemail that we have, or sometimes quite often it's called, the call goes directly to the chair. The initial call from the applicant, who is the first party that calls the chair, is an initial assessment to determine if it is a CAB case, because quite often we do get cases that are not CAB related. In that case, the Jamati member would be informed that this is not a CAB case. If there is any indication that there's crisis at issue, then the Jamati member could either be asked to call 911 or be referred to the Social Welfare Board, who will then look after the Jamati member through the social workers that are present in the institutions. Assuming that it is a CAB case and with the approval of the applicant, the CAB will then connect with the other party, who will be referred to as a respondent. Once both parties agree to work with CAB, the chair would now be looking into assigning mediators. There is a process that's involved in the initial phase where an early assessment of any possibility of domestic violence is involved. If there is, then obviously appropriate steps need to be taken to ensure the safety of the party involved. There is a check for conflict of interest of mediators as well before mediators are assigned to the case. And in most cases, there is 2 mediators assigned. Majority of our cases are matrimonial, so usually there's a male and a female that's assigned. The mediators then take on calls with each of the parties. Initially, as a pre-mediation call would be done individually with each parties, where the CAB process is explained and the respective forms that need to be signed. There's a submission form and a personal detail form that the parties provide to the mediators. At this time, the mediator go through a more detailed screening for domestic violence, and appropriate steps would need to be taken if there is any indication of that taking place. Once the parties are on board, the mediators are assigned. The mediators then start the mediation process. Depending on the type of case, a lot of the cases will be individual meetings with the parties and occasionally a joint meeting as well. Under the current COVID situation, all our mediations are held via either conference call or video conferencing. Each party is given equal opportunity to share their side of the story. The mediator's role is not to judge the parties. It is not there to judge who is right, who is wrong. The mediators are there to help the parties explore the issues and have the parties be able to generate their own options of how they wish to resolve their disputes. The whole idea is that the mediation process is just providing a platform for the parties to have their discussion in the presence of another neutral party with the assistance to be able to resolve their dispute. The parties are requested once the mediation process is completed and a minutes of settlement or a memorandum of understanding is prepared for them before the parties sign those documents, they're requested to get independent legal advice, so that they're aware of their obligations and arrangements that they have made before signing the memorandum of understanding. Once that is done, on our side, as far as CAB is concerned, we classified that as a successful case and we closed the case. However, there is post-settlement surveys that are done with the parties. There's a mediator survey that's done for mediators themselves to assess their satisfaction on the case. There's a survey done for each of the parties. That's usually done anywhere from 3 to 4 months after the process is completed for CAB to understand the satisfaction level that the Jamati members had. And then there's a follow-up usually done to ensure the durability of the agreement that was prepared for them. If during the process, if there is an indication that the Jamati members require referrals to any of our sister institutions going forward, whether it be during mediation or soon after. It could be Social Welfare Board, it could be the Health Board, it could be Economic Planning Board. Appropriate referrals are made to those institutions with the permission of the Jamati members. The important part that Chairman Al Nawaz mentioned as well earlier is that the data that's collected through this process is used then to playback for other institutions to let them know of what the root causes of the disputes have been, and for them to be able to prepare appropriate prevention programs. Here are some of the things that CAB does and what CAB does not do. So if we look at the column on the left-hand side, we provide confidential and free mediation services as long as one party is an Ismaili. They don't both need to be Ismailis. If one party is an Ismaili, we take on the case. The key thing is that both parties have to voluntarily consent to participate in the process. We help the parties to reach their own settlement. As mentioned earlier, we're not there to arbitrate for them what they should and should not do. The idea is that the mediation process will allow them to come up with their own solutions. The playback of the root causes to sister institutions is something that we do ongoing. On the other side, if you see what we don't do is we do not provide legal advice, financial advice, or counseling services. We may share legal information with the parties for them to understand what their rights and obligations are. This knowledge would be one that is readily available to any non-legal person without being classified as legal advice. If there is a situation where there's criminal matters involved, we do not take on that case. The only exception is sometimes in a matrimonial dispute, there is restraining order for one party. We do take on those cases if there is an exemption made in the restraining order where CAB is specified as a body that's allowed to communicate with the two parties with the sole purpose of mediation. We have taken on cases like that with that exemption marked on that restraining order. We do not take on cases that are complaints against Jamati institutions or volunteers, and we don't take it on ourselves to conduct any investigations on what the parties have done or not done. And as Chairman Al Nawaz alluded earlier, that we do not report to the council, to ITREB, or to any Jamati institutions. The case information is kept strictly with CAB, from RCAB to NCAB to ICAB. No individual details are shared with any of the bodies at all. To give you a brief understanding of the number of cases that we receive, you can see a 5-year period ending July 2020, 2015 to 2020, and then 2009 to 2014. These are the total number of cases that we've handled across Canada. So if you look at 724 is roughly about 150 cases per year. Ontario would be roughly about 35%. Prairies and BC are roughly about 25% each. And then you see the number of cases that we see as interregional and international. Out of the 700 odd cases, about 100 are with either within the provinces of Canada or from Canada to one of the other countries. Majority of our cases are matrimonial. Approximately 70% on an ongoing basis are matrimonial cases. 21% is commercial, and then the other ones are classified as other, usually relating to inheritance related issues or health or personal caregiving related issues. Our overall success rate is in the 70-75% range. We classify success is when we are able to take on a case and see it to closure with an agreement signed for both parties. Occasionally, there are cases either where the parties themselves have decided not to continue. There is some cases where CAB has to withdraw from cases midstream. So those are not counted into our success rate. Just to give you a brief information on the playback of root causes. In the matrimonial, and majority of these you would probably be familiar with. However, once they're identified to the sister institutions, quite often they do take it on to do programming that are related to specific areas of issues that have been identified. So you have in the area of matrimonial, financial management is being one of the key ones. Lack of communication in a couple, which is seen quite often when one thing creates an issue, then the communication level keeps diminishing as well. Insufficient due diligence done prior to being engaged in a marital relationship on the views and values of each of the individuals. Health issues, addictions, mental illness are noticed quite often. And then family interference from either side of the family, whether it be in-laws or other relatives that create an issue for the couple themselves. In commercial disputes, obviously poor documentation is the key one, where either there's no shareholders agreement or just a basic standard shareholders agreement was prepared with not much meat to it. There's differing expectations of the parties that went into partnerships, and then no proper exit strategy identified when the time comes for either of the parties to leave. In the area of family or others that we identified in our stats that we shared, inheritance issues where there's no will is an issue that's brought up quite often. And then health and personal care decisions that are disputed amongst the siblings for their parents, where they have a difference in opinion on how things should be handled. What are the benefits of using our services? The key one is that it's free. We don't have any costs associated with our services. There's no cost to the parties. The only time they incur a cost is when they go for the independent legal advice after their agreement has been prepared. The service, as Chairman Al-Nawaz mentioned earlier, is strictly confidential. The only time that the confidentiality is broken is when the mediators feel that either the children are at risk or either of the parties are at risk to themselves or to the other party. In that case, the appropriate authorities would have to be called. Or very rarely, if the court has issued a subpoena for certain information that has to be provided for court purposes. But otherwise, no information is shared with anybody else except the chair and the two mediators that are involved. At a regional level, we do not discuss any cases, individual cases at our meetings, and the stats that we keep are on an online computer software that we have, which only identifies the cases by case numbers. There's no names input into the system at all. The key thing is the benefits of using our services, that both parties came to us voluntarily. If they came to us voluntarily, there's a higher chance that they will have an agreement because both are coming in with good intentions. We comply with the Canadian laws and our ethical values of tolerance, generosity, honesty, etc. We help parties create their own solutions to the dispute. And in most cases, or every case, I would say that it's faster and much less expensive than going to court. We have highly trained, qualified, and neutral mediators. Our mediators undertake, at appointment time, they undertake a 40-hour course that is put out by ICAB. It's a recognized course that ICAB puts out for all new members once we start. And then once that is done, we have ongoing training that happens with the members as we progress further. In fact, as we speak right now, majority of our members are involved in a 21-hour, it's three consecutive Sundays, 7 hours each, training on domestic violence that we're taking. Some of us have already taken it before and taking this back again as a refresher. Some of them are new mediators, and we're taking that course right now in Ontario. There are many mediators that we have on board that have accreditation certificates as well through a common organization is FIDRIO that they're accredited by. CAB members are appointed by Hazimam for a 3-year term. So the current appointment goes from 2019 to 2022 July of each year. The membership comprises of diverse members in terms of their professions, their background, and their languages. There is a few lawyers that are on board on the CAB team. However, when they're doing mediations, they're not serving as lawyers at that time. And this is made clear to the parties that the person is a lawyer, but he or she is not there in the capacity of a lawyer. They're strictly there as mediators. A key component in our success is the past members who quite often continue to serve as what we call alumni members to assist with mediations. If you were to look at a situation in Ontario, our appointed members are 11, and we have almost 16 alumni members that work with us on an ongoing basis to assist with cases. Most cases, especially the matrimonial cases, are assigned 2 mediators, 1 male and 1 female. And the mediators are assigned based on the complexity of the cases and diverse background of the parties. As mentioned earlier, right now, all our mediations are conducted via conference calls or video conferencing. And it was a new technology that we all had to adapt, and we're still learning as we go forward in how to best make use of this technology to make sure that we do justice to the parties that we're serving. So some of the myths that you may have heard or you may have yourself about CAB. The first one is in a matrimonial case, CAB's primary role is to reconcile parties. If you go back to prior to our times coming to Canada, back home, wherever our countries could be, or in our early days in Canada, whenever a party had disputes, we did not have CAB in place at that time. And the parties would normally go either to some relatives or to Mukhi Kamriyas, and with all good intentions, their role was to try to reconcile the parties, which in some cases was beneficial, in some cases it was not. As far as CAB is concerned, our primary role is not to just explore reconciliation of parties. We do mention that to the parties when they come to us, and if we get an indication that either of the parties have indicated that they would like to reconcile, the mediators would explore that further to see how that can happen, and to make sure that both parties are willing to work at it and refer to appropriate counseling services outside. However, our primary role is not in the area of forcing parties to reconcile. The second one is that CAB's role is just to find a middle ground between the parties in dispute. It's quite often, I guess, perceived as a role that CAB has, that if you're claiming $5 and I'm claiming $10, let's just settle for $7.50. This way, both of us lose $2.50 or gain $2.50. If that was the sole purpose of CAB, then you don't need mediators to help you through that process. So our role is not just to find a middle point and say, take this and leave this. Our role is for the parties for themselves to understand what the dispute is, where the dispute is, what is the reason behind the dispute, and then what is the reason for asking or not asking for whatever amounts that they're asking for, or whatever reasons that they're having this. With that understanding, our role then is to try to facilitate discussions where they will eventually come up with their own resolutions, which we will document for them in the agreement that we prepare for them. The other myth would be that CAB mediated cases take a lot longer to resolve than going through litigation. Unfortunately, a lot of the parties that come to us have that impression when they first start, because they've not gone through litigation. They start the CAB process, it goes on, and they realize that things are not moving as fast because maybe one of the parties is not providing the information fast enough, etc. And then they opt out of CAB to go through litigation. So there is cases where people have come to mediation, left us, gone to litigation, and then came back to us realizing that it is not really any faster to go through litigation than to go through mediation. Our average cases, best practices that are established by ICAB is that we want to try to close the case within a 4 to 6 month period. However, to be realistic, it's very difficult to close majority of the cases in 6 months. Quite often they do extend anywhere from 6 months to 12 months, depending on the complexity of the cases. But be rest assured that if it went through litigation, it would not be that much faster, because it's not easy to have the two lawyers talk to each other and provide them the same information in a timely manner. Another myth, while enrolled in CAB mediation, parties are not allowed to consult lawyers. The parties are actually informed and encouraged to consult lawyers if they feel they need legal advice during the mediation process. The only time they're not allowed to use lawyers is for litigation purposes. If they do take on a case and start the litigation process, then mediation has to stop. But if they're just using the lawyers as consultants, then that's absolutely fine. When using CAB services, parties do not have to provide full financial disclosure. Quite often, parties that have this understanding would come to CAB, and then they realize that the process we follow is exactly the same process that the courts or the lawyers would follow, and what the court would require if it ever went to court. And the financial disclosure form that we use is the same form that's used by the available under the Family Law Act. Is Form 13 and 13.1, which the parties are required to fill out if they decide to use CAB services. A lot of times, cases that CAB does not continue with are because the parties are not truthful in providing full financial disclosure, and then we do not continue with those cases. Before we leave today, we would like you to know how you can help us now. So the key one becomes, and we said this in the opening, is that you become ambassadors to create CAB awareness within the Jamat in your personal and in your professional capacity. A lot of you are health professionals, and depending on the health profession that you're in, I'm sure you come across Jamati members that are going through difficult period because of certain disputes or the things that are happening in their lives. Whether it be at the personal level or your professional capacity, if you do come across cases where you feel people are facing these challenges, and now that you're more aware of what services CAB is able to provide, we would really appreciate that you mention that to them, that why don't you explore the option of contacting CAB and see if you can have them provide assistance. Again, it's not meant for counseling purposes. If they're looking for a counselor, then obviously CAB does not provide counseling services. But if you feel that, you know, in your opinion, that they're going through a dispute, whether it be matrimonial or business related, whatever that you come across, your awareness would enable you to become ambassadors for us within the Jamaat. In addition to that, now that we've shared with you some of the effects that the conflicts have on the quality of life of individuals, if you come across any of your friends or families that are going through this conflict, help them understand what impact it has on their quality of life. And it's not just theirs, it's the whole family that goes down with the children as well. Because imagine that a family that's earning, let's say $50,000 each, they're earning $100,000 in total. Now, all of a sudden, if they decide to separate, they now have two households to maintain. The children have to be going from one to the other. There's child support, the spousal support. It actually diminishes the quality of life for both of those individuals. And it could be, doesn't matter what income level you're at, it does have a significant impact on the quality of life and the relationship going forward for the couple that's involved. Because remember that when there's a matrimonial dispute, the two people have not gotten along as husband and wives. But if they have children, they're always going to be parents to their children. So they have to maintain a certain relationship amongst themselves in order to make sure that they're serving to the best interest of what is in best interest of the children. So whatever that you can do to give them that information and have them use CAB services would be really appreciated. And then the last one is that where the opportunity arises, you can serve as conflict coaches to de-escalate the level of conflict. So there is some people that have decided that they want to go through the litigation system, and they're probably in litigation, but they're at it on a day-to-day basis and a month-to-month and a year-to-year basis. We've heard of cases where matrimonial cases have gone on for 4 or 5 years, and they've spent $50,000 to $100,000 each in the process. If you come across people like that, help them understand of how to de-escalate the level of conflict instead of having that ego to be the right person and to prove a point of whatever they're trying to prove, because it does have a significant impact on the quality of life of the families as they go forward. If they feel that CAB mediation services is not for them because they do not want anybody else within the Jamaat, including the CAB chair or the mediators, know about them, there's mediation services outside the community that they can use. If they feel mediation is not for them, and if they want to go into litigation, an option would be for them to consider the types of law practices that are not, I guess that they're, I'm looking for the term that that's used for lawyers that are meant specifically for family law, that are not meant to litigate to the nth degree to go to court. So there is different types of lawyers they can use, so that the intention is not that we will end up in court by going through this process. Our team in Canada is basically the 5 regions. We have a CAB in Edmonton, in British Columbia, in the Prairies, in Calgary, Quebec and Maritimes, and Ontario. The phone numbers for each one is there. However, we don't expect you to memorize these. Just remember our website, cabcanada.org. If you go on there, you can click on the contact site and it'll take you to the appropriate province that you would like to connect with. And our mandate is that when a call comes in, the first connection has to be done within the first 24 to 48 hours when the call is made. And the recording usually says if it's an emergency, then it should not be left at that time. It should be used for purposes of getting information on CAB services, but not for emergency purposes where Social Welfare Board would have to be called. I think that's the end of my presentation, and we'll take you back to Anar for questions that you may have.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Zahir Banji and Chairman Alnawaz Nanji, for all of that lot of useful information. So we are going to now go into questions. And if you haven't already done so, please, you can still enter your question into the question box. And we will try and address as many as time permits. We may even group some questions so that we can try and cover more questions. So I will read out the question as they've come up, and we'll direct it to either Chairman Nanji or Chairman Banji, and they can address the question. So the first one is actually directed to Chairman Nanji, and the question is disciplinary action as judicial body. That's the question, and I'm assuming that they require clarification in the information that was shared earlier in the slide.
So hopefully I can clarify it. As our name suggests, it's Conciliation and Arbitration Board. So part of our mandate is to do arbitrations, and our focus has predominantly been in Canada to focus on conciliation and mediation. We are looking at doing commercial arbitrations, so that's another part of our mandate in Canada. With respect to CAB as a whole, we do act as a quasi-judicial body, and what that means is, in the Constitution, there's a process, a disciplinary action process. Again, in very circumscribed situations, and where that process is engaged, CAB acts as a judicial body. We listen to evidence, we listen to the parties, we make a decision. And so we do act in a judicial capacity, just like a court would act, as the Constitution requires us to do. So that's what that means in terms of disciplinary action as a judicial body. CAB acts as effectively a court.
Okay, thank you. The next question is for Chairman Banji, and it's on respondent. So when the respondent refuses to come to CAB, what is the process that is used so that we talk about that the conflict is something that impacts the entire family and all of the people around them. So when that happens, what is the process that CAB uses, and what is some educational education that is provided so that there's an understanding of the CAB services? Perhaps if you can elaborate on that. You're on mute, Chairman Banji.
Sorry about that. The key thing that we need to make sure is that we do our best at the very first intake level to try to get the respondent on board. Depending on how receptive they are to our services, we can engage with them in a discussion of what advantages they have in using our services, etc., etc. Sometimes the respondent agrees right away. Sometimes it does take a week, 2 weeks, or a month or 2 months before they decide to take on our services. If they decide not to take on our services, then unfortunately we can't proceed with the mediation. However, we do try to provide support to the applicant to provide them relevant information in terms of what their next steps could be for them to consider, without giving legal advice. So we give them the options of what other things that they could do. One thing that has worked in my personal experience is because once the respondent is not agreeing, there's not much option left but to initiate a litigation process. And what I usually recommend to the applicant is that you can start a very preliminary litigation process in hiring a lawyer just to write that first letter to the respondents to say that acknowledging the fact that you've approached CAB, CAB has approached you as well, and you've refused to take on mediation. So I'm just letting you know that if you do not want to continue with that, then I will have no option but to use litigation. And quite often that letter that has come from the applicant's lawyer has triggered a movement from the respondent to call me back and say that they want to use our services. In some cases, unfortunately, it doesn't, and then the applicant would have to take it on their own. But we do provide as much information that we can share with them as to how things are calculated, how is equalization payments calculated, what are the rights parents have as far as custody is concerned, things like that. And these are all information that's readily available, but we share with them anyways.
Thank you, Chairman. Okay, so the next question is for Chairman Nanji. The question is, how are CAB members identified or chosen? Is there an application process? What qualifications are needed to serve?
So there's no application process. All members of CAB are appointed by Hazirmam. Hazirmam is the one that chooses the members. In terms of, just like any other institution, we look for people from various diverse backgrounds. You don't want to have all lawyers. You don't want to have all non-lawyers. You want a diverse group of people. Being a mediator is very different. You need to be able to listen to people, make sure you get out, as I gave you an example with the prophet, the position of, I want to put the stone up, it's my honor, versus the interest, I want to be respected. People that can talk to people effectively, understand, and really most importantly, listen. So we've had past Mukikamriar, we've had health professionals. You really want a diverse group of people, and also the diversity of our Jamat, reflecting that diversity is very important.
Thank you. Chairman Banji, do we have low-income legal services for the members of the Jamaat who cannot afford a lawyer?
Unfortunately, institutionally, we do not provide that service. CAB doesn't, and nor do any of the other institutions within our group of institutions that provide legal services. There is community clinics out there that provide information. If the Jamaati member is not eligible for legal aid, there is other community centers, legal community clinics that provide certain information that they may need. Otherwise, legal aid is the option that they would have to use for low-income families. But as institutions, there is no institution within our setup that provides legal services.
Okay, thank you. I think we have time for 2 more questions. So the next one, Chairman Nanji, is the husband went to remarry without divorcing his first wife. How do we deal with this issue?
So there's not a lot of information about this question as to what is the dispute before CAB. Is it a separation? Is it custody with the kids? What is it? It doesn't tell you much. As an institution, again, we have to follow the laws of the land. So in situations like this, I would expect the RCAB chair, if someone approached the RCAB chair, to tell the person to get independent legal advice, because there are consequences of getting married if you haven't divorced your first spouse. Criminal matter. So, to the extent that it deals with criminality, CAB doesn't deal with those matters specifically. There's not a lot of information about what is the real dispute in question here.
Okay. Chairman Banji, if litigation has been already started by one of the parties, can they still come to CAB?
They do come to CAB occasionally when litigation is started, and the only requirement on our side is that once the parties have been approached and they have both agreed to use our services, that we ask them to inform their respective lawyers to say that they would like to put a pause on the litigation process, as they're now engaging in mediation services with CAB. We request that to be sent to their respective lawyers with a copy to us so that we're aware that their respective lawyers have been informed. And we do take on the case. Like I said earlier, if as long as litigation is not continuing, mediation can still happen.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and I will address that to Chairman Nanji. Social workers support with social issues. Health professionals help with health issues. Why are lawyers not supporting with legal matters on a volunteer basis?
So in terms of CAB, there are lawyers on the board. They don't act as lawyers; they're mediators. And we look at a variety of and diverse backgrounds for CAB members. If the question is generally why aren't there lawyers supporting the Jamat on legal matters, there are lawyers out there that are supporting the Jamat. There are various legal alliances that are available, and some offer pro bono services. It's just not a service that CAB offers. But I think within the Jamat, there are lawyers that are Ismaili lawyers that are willing to assist people, and through the alliances, I think that's one way that the Jamat can access those people.
Just to add to what Chairman Nanji said, the Legal Professionals Alliance, which the short form is OLPA, Ontario Legal Professionals Alliance, they do have actually a process in place where if a Jamati members require legal services and are not able to pay, they could write to this body and request an assistance, and it's sent out to their membership. And if any of the members, the legal professionals that it goes out to, are willing to take on the case, then they do respond and take it on their own. It is not something through the institutions or through CAB.
Perfect. Thank you. So I think we're at that time now where it's the end of the session. And if there were questions that we have not addressed because time did not allow us to do so, please do approach your Chairman Banji shared the contact information for the regional chairs. Do please contact your regional chairs with any questions that we may not have addressed today or any other new questions that you may have. Please feel free to do that at any time. They will be happy to help you. So on behalf of...
Anna, you forgot one main question that came up. And the question is, how do you identify a CAB member in Jamat Thana? And the answer is that you'll see him standing alone because no Jamati member wants to approach him, because otherwise when he goes home, his wife or husband might ask him, what were you talking to Zahir about? So that was my closing joke.
Oh, okay, I get it. Well, thank you. It's always good to have that. So on behalf of both the speakers here, Chairman Alnawaz Nanji, Chairman Zahir Panji, and the entire CAB team, I would like to thank you for attending tonight's session. And we hope that you found this information useful and are now equipped to direct murids who can benefit from CAB's services. And thank you so much for attending today, and inshallah, we will talk again. Thank you. Yali Madad.
Thank you, everyone. Yali Madad.